Many people online, on podcasts, are talking about the fact that the lying legacy corporate corrupt mainstream media is not covering the 40-mile convoy barreling through Canada. 40 miles of tractor trailers, bumper to bumper to bumper, making their way to the nation's capital to protest vaccine mandates. Because after all, truckers alone in the cab of their truck, they could be super spreaders. Nobody in the regular media is talking about it, but the alternative media is all over it. But a week ago, January the 23rd on a Sunday, there was a rally in Washington, D.C. The conservative media has all been but mute on that rally, and the lying legacy corporate corrupt mainstream media, what they did say was it was just a complete flip of what actually happened. So what's really going on? On Sunday, January the 23rd, over 20,000 protesters convened in Washington, D.C. They were on the Mall, they were at the Lincoln Memorial, and they were there to protest the vaccine mandates within the city of Washington. But they came from around the country using Washington as the symbol. No vaccine passports anywhere in this nation. Let us be free. But of course, the media that did cover it didn't cover it that way. I know, you're shocked, you're surprised that the media would actually disparage these people.
We have to talk about this very bizarre anti-vaccine rally in Washington today.
Jim Acosta, your CNN, your fake news.
Rolling Stone magazine said it was a rally of the anti-vaxxers. And of course, their headline, completely misleading. Again, I know you're shocked. Were there anti-vaxxers there? Well, of course there were. Out of the 20,000 plus people who were there, even the Washington Post had to acknowledge the group was 60-40. 40% Trump supporters, 60% independents, hippies, and non-Trump supporters. Bum. The real reason the lying legacy corporate corrupt mainstream media, when they did cover this event, distorted it, the real reason they didn't want to tell you what was really going on, it's their worst nightmare. It's the real reason that the political elite are trying to quash this thing and crush it and discredit it by lying about it. Their worst nightmare is if left and right stop fighting with each other and actually unite on an issue. So what do? They disparage it, they mischaracterize it, and they say it's a convention of the unvaccinated. The funny thing is, many of the people who spoke at this rally are vaccinated, even with the new corona vaccine. Now, one of them, and couldn't get any video footage of this because it's gone down the YouTube wormhole, actually tore up his vaccination card during his speech and said, we need to do to these vaccine passports what war protesters did to their draft cards during the Vietnam War. I mean, this is a new revolution, and this revolution is one the left is not ready for. See, Democrats have done a great job, and I talked about this the other day. They've done a great job of infusing into their ranks this idea that they're the ones that are progressive and the ones that are for quote-unquote real freedom and anti-tyranny, and that's why, they welcomed in the hippies and the war protesters of the 1960s, 1970s. And now that is actually being spun back and against them, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. That there's actually people referring to them now as the man, the establishment. But in reality, who is the totalitarian here? Is it the GOP, the Republicans? Was it Donald Trump? Because that's all we heard for 4 years, that Orange Man was a tyrant and he wanted to hit you with just oppressive rules and regulations and take away all your freedoms. Were you freer under Donald Trump or now? Did you have to prove a medical status to walk into a Burger King to buy a Whopper? Now, I'm serious about that. Now, the rally overall was organized by a group represented by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And of course, he is public enemy number one among the liberal establishment. And the reason being, his father, of course, the brother of John F. Kennedy, who was one time Attorney General and probably would have won his bid for the presidency had he not been assassinated. So the Kennedy legacy dynasty within the Democratic Party is one of those just iconic mental psyches that you'll just never divorce the Democrats from. And the fact that Robert Kennedy, though he is a card-carrying liberal, has raised a lot of questions over previous years regarding vaccinations and the rise in things like autism, etc. And I'm not here defending the views of Robert F. Kennedy. I'm not in any way endorsing what he's saying regarding those issues. What I am saying is the speech that he gave, which has been so demonized and mischaracterized by the media, i.e. CNN, that we're going to play just a clip of it, and then we'll show you how CNN took it completely out of context from what he was actually saying.
What we're seeing today is what I call turnkey totalitarianism. They are putting in place all of these technological mechanisms for control we've never seen before. It's been the ambition of every totalitarian state from the beginning of mankind to control every aspect of behavior, of conduct, of thought, and to obliterate dissent. None of them have been able to do it. They didn't have the technological capacity. Even in Hitler's Germany, you could cross the Alps into Switzerland. You can hide in an attic like Anne Frank did. I visited in 1962 East Germany with my father and met people who had climbed the wall and escaped. So it was possible. Many died doing it, but it was possible.
And how did Jim Acosta, the guy that Donald Trump looked right at and said, "You are fake news," how did he take the comments of Robert Kennedy Jr.?
Okay.
I mean, this is just insanity. I mean, you know, first of all, we should point out Auschwitz put out a tweet, explaining that, exploiting the tragedy of people who suffered, were humiliated, tortured, and murdered by this totalitarian regime of Nazi Germany, including children like Anne Frank, in a debate about vaccines and limitations during the global pandemic is a sad symptom of moral and intellectual decay. That from the Auschwitz Museum. I mean, John and Margaret, it just boggles the mind. I think there's something wrong with him.
So you already see the spin at work here. Now, again, I am not defending the mass anti-vaccination views of Robert Kennedy Jr., but I will say this about his speech. He was not saying that vaccination is Nazism. That's not what he was saying. And when you see the media rally together, and when you see groups from around the world from a leftist viewpoint all kind of coalesce around the same talking points, you know that the fix is on. I find it interesting that the Auschwitz Memorial issue a tweet statement regarding the highly offensive speech of Robert Kennedy Jr. when, in fact, Austria, remember them? They were annexed by Germany during World War II. Austria has enacted some of the most egregious mandates on the planet. They actually quarantined 2 million unvaccinated. They were allowed to leave their homes to grocery shop and to work. Other than that, they had to be home, and if they were caught out in public, they could be fined and or arrested. Think about that. You live in Austria. You're a waiter in a restaurant. By law, you are allowed to go to work, put your mask on, work all day, serve customers. But as soon as you clocked out, You had to go straight home. You weren't even allowed to sit down at a table at the restaurant you work at and order a meal and eat it because you were, quote, unclean. Anybody see some parallels here? Austria, Germany, which was on the cusp of actually legislating vaccine requirement. You would have no choice. Austria doing the same thing. You have no choice. You will take the vaccination. And again, this is not a commentary against vaccination. It is a commentary, as was the rally in Washington, D.C., against mandates, against forcing someone to receive a medical procedure that they choose not to, and restricting their freedoms if they don't make the choice that the powers that be decide they should. And when you have video footage, and lots of it in places like Germany, where people are being thrown to the ground, one old woman thrown to the ground by what looks like decked out stormtroopers, slapping handcuffs on her, and what was her offense? Being outside in public without a mask. I'm sorry, but there are scenes from Schindler's List just flying through my head right now. The one-armed Jew who was shot because he couldn't shovel a sidewalk, the having to show your papers, and the get on your side of the street, and the wear the star so we know that you're, quote, unclean. And when these things are happening again in places like Germany and Austria, do you understand why those kind of comparisons then get made? But that's not even the comparison that he was trying to say there. He was talking about the fact that all of these mandates are really about, and I loved the way he called it, turnkey tyranny, or tyrannical turnkey. In other words, it is a conditioning of stop asking questions, don't protest, don't you dare push back, just do what the experts tell you, line up and do it. And that the more societies give in to this, that's how tyrants then take control. That's how they strip you of your rights. That's how they limit your freedom, because they have conditioned you not to question, not to protest, not to speak up. They have conditioned you to obey. And he was making the case that in places like Nazi Germany, which was very much about compliance, don't you dare speak up, or you could be taken out of your home in the middle of the night for questioning, never to return. He was saying in those times, and even places like when Berlin was divided, east and west, when the Soviets took over, and that tyrants, what they want to do is they want to control your every movement and restrict your freedom. But they didn't have the technology available at that time to really pull it off, because you could escape. And what he's talking about now is what they're doing, whether it be the 5G technology you carry in your pocket, or the fact that, as I've said before, and Bill Gates is already talking about the next pandemic that's coming. So he's already written this one off. He really does believe Fauci dropped the ball on this. It got out years before it was supposed to, because he didn't have his part of this equation already. And I told you this. The vaccine had to work completely. There were going to be no glitches. That's how people were just, without even questioning, going to line up and take it, because it worked. They wanted a vaccine that actually worked. This one is what doctors all call a leaky vaccine. That's why you've got to have 2 doses. And now the CDC has officially said that to be fully vaccinated, to be current, you got to have the booster. Bump. And how many boosters will be required? Have you had to have your polio booster lately? So some of us have argued that if it's a leaky vaccine, and now we know that people who are vaccinated, this is the science, this is the actual science. People who are vaccinated can get the virus, they can spread the virus. So it doesn't stop it, it doesn't even delay it. I guess you can make the argument based on the data that they are providing to us, and we don't know exactly where all that data comes from and who funded it. But by the data that they are providing to us, people who are vaccinated technically speaking, statistically speaking, percentage-wise speaking, do stand a greater chance of not being hospitalized. But Bill Gates was upset because he wanted the thing to work, and he needed a few more years to develop his part of it, which was the jab was going to include digital tracing technology. That with a scan, they would have all of your medical data so they could know what was wrong with you. Kind of like when you take your car to the garage and plug it into the computer. But you know it was going to involve so much more than that. That's the way it will be sold and presented to the American people. Don't worry about fumbling through your wallet or your handbag looking for your medical card to get your prescription, or having to answer the same questions over and over every time you change doctors. Just with a quick scan, we got it. We got it. That's how it'll be sold to the American people. But what will happen is this is all about setting up compliance. We already know that they're test marketing this in places like India, where if your vaccination status is not considered current, because you use a digital passport in India for everything, they can cut you off from your bank accounts. They can cut you off from your actual passport to leave. They can cut you off from everything. It's all digitally connected. That's what Robert Kennedy Jr. is warning against. And of course, how does CNN take it? Well, you know how they take it and how they laughed at it. Oh, this is ridiculous. Notice they didn't refute it. They mocked it. It's like when you've been in an argument with somebody and you've absolutely, right between the eyes, just nailed it and nailed them. And all they can retort with is an insult. So the rally in Washington was not an anti-vaccination rally. It was an anti-mandate. And what they have done, and they don't realize, and I'm talking about the left, and I'm talking about the oligarch, the political establishment, the ruling class, what they've done is the one thing that they did not want to do. They united the left and the right. Because most of the speakers at this rally, and many of them were black, and I noticed no clips of them made it to the evening news. Many of them were black, many from places like New York City, many of them Democrats. But they're anti-mandate. That's the issue, the mandating. Jimmy Dore had Max Blumenthal, who is a noted journalist. Now, he is a leftist. He doesn't hide it. He has very socialistic ideas, and I get it. And he's a little wrong on some of his history regarding socialism and its effects. But nonetheless, he was at the rally. He covered the rally, and he was on the Jimmy Dore show. And Max was supposed to be one of the speakers at the rally, but their permit was from, I think, like 12 noon to 3:30. And right at 3:30 p.m., the D.C. Park Service turned off the PA equipment and dispersed the group. So he didn't get his chance to speak. And Jimmy asked him, well, do you have your speech? And he says, well, I got it right here with me. He was at an airport on his way somewhere. And Jimmy said, well, why don't you go ahead and give your speech here online? So I'm going to play you. It's about a 3.5, 4-minute speech. Max Blumenthal, what he would have said at this D.C. rally had he been allowed to speak.
Yeah, I come at this issue from the left. I come from the left, and it's really unfortunate that some people on the left don't want me to be here today. So I just want to make one thing clear. When people all around the world are marching against the mandates in their own societies, from the indigenous Bolivians of El Alto and La Paz, to Moroccans of Casablanca, to Iranians in Tehran, from Beirut to Berlin to Boston, it's pretty clear that this is not a left-right issue. This is not about left and right. This is about our rights, our basic rights that we fought for. This is about decent working people trying to hold on to their humanity, their bodily autonomy, their rights, and their very sanity against a cold and ruthless corporatist machine that seeks to reduce every individual to a QR code and condition their participation in society on their compliance with a mandate. And it won't be the last mandate. Now, let me make something clear to my friends on the right, because I hear this a lot. The extra constitutional biomedical regime being imposed on us is not socialism. This is not socialism. In reality, when big pharma and its investors control our governments, when they own the FDA, when they've turned our politicians into sales reps, so now Pfizer and Moderna make combined profits of $65,000 per minute while working class Americans suffer the sharpest increase in poverty in 50 years. When the wealth of the world's 10 richest men has doubled since the lockdowns began, while the wealth of the global 99% has declined precipitously, we are living under corporatism, not socialism, corporatism, under a ruthless imperialist corporate state that exists in a permanent state of war. And now the forever war has come home. And it shouldn't be surprising to those who know this corporate state that bombs and sanctions people across the globe in the name of human rights, that it would instantly lock down millions of people at home, depriving them of work and schooling, driving them into desperation and insanity, and to justify all that in the name of public health. See, the same corporate state that lied about weapons of mass destruction to manufacture consent for a war in Iraq had no problem lying about gain-of-function research sponsored by the Pentagon's DARPA Research Unit and the U.S. Agency for International Development. The same corporate state that's holding journalist and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange a political prisoner because he exposed its secrets has set about to censor and demonize and blacklist and suppress every dissenting voice that gets in the way of its draconian biomedical agenda. So a corporate state with so little legitimacy must divide its citizens to conquer them. And that's why it's polarized us between the vaccinated and unvaccinated, scapegoating the latter group and blaming it for its own failures in order to shatter the solidarity of the 99%. This corporate state has given us two corporate parties, hundreds of corporate media outlets brought to you by Pfizer, the arms industry, and Wall Street, and only two medical options when it comes to the coronavirus, Pfizer and Moderna. So here's my message to the corporate state and its media stenographers. COVID might have temporarily taken away our sense of smell, but we can smell the steaming pile of shit that you're cooking, and we're not buying it.
Boom. Nuff said. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you're a subscriber to the channel and make sure that you are getting connected with us over at Rumble. It's only a matter of time before we can't do here what we've been doing, so make sure you've got us on Rumble.